ain't know, that's David Johnson. The next big thing.
David Johnson's to me, in my opinion, he's the number one running back in the NFL.
That kid is amazing.
In 2016, there was a force in the NFL that just could not be stopped. A player who quickly became a fantasy football legend. This was a guy who showed that he could basically do it all on the football field, and his name was David Johnson. But just as quickly as he reached the pinnacle of his career, he completely disappeared. His dominant season is now just a distant memory for us fans, and his career never really wound up being what it was supposed to. This isn't just a story about a player getting old or regressing over the course of his career. This is the story of how a single devastating injury basically derailed his entire career, beginning one of the quietest and most shocking declines in recent NFL history. Before he got into the NFL, he wasn't highly sought after. Coming out of the University of Northern Iowa, a smaller school, he wasn't on the radar of casual fans or even many draft experts. He was a small school kid with big-time talent, and he set school records with over 4,600 rushing yards and a staggering 63 touchdowns. But the question remained, could he do it against the best in the world? And you know how some of these things go. Stats don't exactly matter in college when you're playing against weaker competition. At the end of the day, though, all Johnson needed was just one team to take a shot on him in the NFL draft. And thankfully, he got that opportunity. The Arizona Cardinals wound up being that team, grabbing him in the third round of the 2015 NFL draft. Even then, he started his rookie season buried on the depth chart as the fourth-string running back. But in the NFL, opportunity is everything, and in his very first game, on his very first touch, mind you, he caught a pass and turned it into a 55-yard touchdown. 1 week later, he takes a kickoff 108 yards for another touchdown. The flashes here were simply too bright to ignore, and when you have a guy scoring touchdowns whenever the ball hits his hands, it's kinda difficult to keep him behind three other guys on the depth chart. So just as fast as he was listed fourth, he quickly became the number 2 behind Chris Johnson. By the end of his rookie year, Johnson had essentially forced his way into the starting role, proving he belonged, putting up over 1,000 yards from scrimmage and scoring 12 total touchdowns, showcasing his rare mix of power, speed, and receiving ability. It was an incredibly impressive debut that set the stage for one of the most dominant seasons by a running back in the modern era. In 2016, David Johnson wasn't just a good running back, he was an automatic fantasy football league winner for whoever had him. For 16 games, he was the most unstoppable offensive force in the entire NFL. Whatever the Cardinals needed, this man delivered. He was a workhorse runner between the tackles, an absolute nightmare matchup for linebackers in the passing game, and a scoring machine from anywhere on the field. You give him the football, he'll deliver. The numbers that he put up were unreal. Johnson rushed for 1,239 yards and 16 touchdowns, but that was only half the story, because he also caught 80 passes for 879 yards and another 4 scores. When it was all said and done, he led the entire NFL with 2,118 yards from scrimmage and 20 total touchdowns. And if you're wondering, this amount of total yardage is the 44th best of all time in a single season. And while that does sound pretty low, 44th isn't exactly top 10, if you were to add just 100 extra yards to Johnson's season here, he would catapult all the way up to 23rd. Point is that despite being 44th in this category, it's one of the best seasons of all time for a skill position player. Just adding a couple yards would put him like 3 or 4 spots higher. All the guys in this category who are ranked pretty highly by around David Johnson are really close together. Seriously though, in 2016, week after week, this dude was a one-man wrecking crew. He became the first player in NFL history to gain over 100 yards from scrimmage in each of the first 15 games of a season. The league simply had no answer for him no matter what the game plan was, and he was deservedly named a first-team All-Pro selection along with getting his first Pro Bowl nod. It literally wasn't even a conversation as to who the best running back in the league was at the time. Everybody you talked to would instantly just say David Johnson. In fact, some even went so far as to argue that he was one of the best receivers in the NFL that year, with 80 catches to his name. When you put together a season like this, right on the heels of an explosive rookie campaign where you essentially jump into the starting role immediately, it is not uncommon to think that Johnson would be on Hall of Fame trajectory. Like, this guy wasn't even in the prime of his career yet. But then in an instant, everything changed. The 2017 season was supposed to be David Johnson's best season yet. Fresh off his All-Pro campaign, he entered the year with massive expectations, and for good reason. There was talk of him chasing 1,000 rushing and receiving yards each, a feat only accomplished by legends like Marshall Faulk and Roger Craig. And because of this, fantasy football leagues were all over him. He was a consensus number 1 draft pick coming into the season, and it was a no-brainer also. If you picked first and you didn't draft David Johnson, you were considered an idiot at the time. Nowadays, you'd probably be considered a prophet, but skipping out on him really wasn't even a question back then due to the 2016 campaign that he was coming off of. The next season began on September 10th, 2017, in a Week 1 matchup against the Detroit Lions. For Johnson and the entire Cardinals organization, this would become the worst day of their year. On a seemingly routine play, Johnson caught a pass and got tackled near the goal line, but he got up slowly, and it was clear that he wasn't feeling right. He got taken off the field due to injury and was given an initial diagnosis of just a sprained wrist. And this brought some fleeting optimism that he might not even miss a game with this type of injury. But the reality was far more catastrophic for both David Johnson and the entire Cardinals organization. Further tests revealed a dislocated wrist, requiring surgery and effectively ending his entire 2017 campaign before it even started. Head coach Bruce Arians confirmed the devastating news that Johnson was headed for injured reserve, and that was about the end of it. Most people probably won't remember, but he was playing pretty well in that opener before the injury. He had 11 rushes for 23 yards, which is not very good, but he also had 6 catches for 70 yards on top of that. Looking back, he probably was on pace to put up both 1,000 rushing and receiving yards this year just with the amount of volume he was getting from Arizona. And yet all it took was one moment, one single awkward fall to completely end his entire year and all of the momentum that was with him into that new season.
1 minute you're the best player on your team and in the game, the next minute you're rehabbing injury.
It was the start of a downfall that honestly nobody could have anticipated. See, in sports, a comeback story is never guaranteed. We're at a point in time when we watch a player get hurt and us as fans go, oh, well, he just needs surgery. He'll be back out there at the start of next year. But that's not really the case all the time. It's such a mental and physical struggle to get back into peak form, and we take it for granted as fans because we don't have to do it.
Yeah, any of those hand injuries are troublesome because you're always using them. I broke my thumb my last season, and I just kept playing with it because that was my last season. But at the end of the day, you get nervous jabbing when you're blocking. You second guess yourself when you're catching the ball. Just simply holding on to the football, going through traffic can sometimes be painful. So it's definitely something to monitor with David Johnson.
Arizona knew this journey wouldn't be easy for Johnson, but they trusted that he'd be able to return to the player that he once was. And with that confidence came a 3-year, $39 million contract extension that got signed right before the 2018 season. With $30 million guaranteed, it was a clear statement that they believed David Johnson would return to his 2016 form. And while this is obviously a lot less money than what players are getting these days, it was a massive deal back then. Unfortunately, the David Johnson who came back from his injury was not the same player in the slightest. In 2018, Johnson played in all 16 games, but the explosive game-breaking ability looked like it had faded a little bit. He rushed for 940 yards, but his yards per carry average dropped to 3.6. A pretty big dip from his all-pro season where he averaged 4.2. The burst wasn't quite there, the effortless cuts looked more labored than it used to, and I mean, he was still a solid player, he just wasn't as game-breaking. He didn't have a bad year either, but people expected more given the money he was making and the hype that was still surrounding him when he came back. The decline of his career really took off in 2019 though, when he was eventually overtaken on the depth chart by Kenyon Drake. He had just 345 rushing yards and 370 receiving yards, in more of a backup role. It was the offseason after this underwhelming 2019 campaign when Arizona decided to trade him entirely. They sent David Johnson and a draft pick to the Houston Texans in exchange for one of the best wideouts in the world, DeAndre Hopkins. The trade was widely seen as one of the most lopsided in recent memory and heavily favoring Arizona. Like, even though Johnson had been a superstar in the past, he didn't look nearly like the same guy. Meanwhile, D-Hop was consistently thought of as a top 5 player at his position. The pressure for Johnson was immense after this deal, and he later admitted to feeling like he was in a fishbowl where everything he did was magnified because of who he was traded for. And he is completely right. When you're involved in a deal like this, all the Texans fans wanted the player that they got in return for their superstar to be just as impactful as the guy they gave away, with no room for error. Johnson spent 2 seasons with the Texans and didn't exactly do a whole lot. It was mostly forgettable because in 2020 he rushed for 691 yards and hauled in 314 receiving yards, but only played in 12 games. In 2021 he kind of fell off again, rushing for 228 yards and brought in 225 receiving yards, once again missing time and appearing in only 13 games. His numbers were just going further and further down, and it didn't matter how many slight bumps in production he put together throughout the year, it just wasn't the same. By 2022, he was with the New Orleans Saints, seeing action in only 5 games, mostly as a very deep reserve player, and in total he had just 12 rushes for 24 yards and 4 catches for 47 yards in New Orleans. This fully marks the end of his fall. The man who had been the focal point of the entire league at one point was now just a forgotten name and a player that everybody looked back on and said, what if he didn't get hurt in 2017? In May of 2024, David Johnson officially announced his retirement from the NFL after 8 seasons. The first 2 seasons of his career were a meteoric rise, resulting in a season of pure untouchable dominance, but the second was just a quiet fade into obscurity thanks to injuries and outside pressure and expectations off the contract he signed. So this makes his 2016 season like a monument to his talent, despite never seeing it play out to its full potential when he reached his prime. It's basically a perfect snapshot of what should have been a Hall of Fame career. I mean, there aren't many players who can say that they hit 2,000 scrimmage yards in a single season. The easy answer for his massive decline is the wrist injury that he suffered. Everything really started from this point, but it was more than that, I believe. I think the pressure and expectations really killed his confidence and ability to perform at the highest level. This all just factors together to create one of the most upsetting declines in recent memory, and now for the rest of our lives, we're going to have to sit here and think about what it could have been like if Johnson never dislocated his wrist in the first place.